Yes indeed, this is what we need. It is the official Fionn expose courtesy of your boy. We got the Patreon request from my guy Crumpet, who also agreed that this video needs to be done. He says, actually man, if that's the case, then that's my next video request. Expose the lies and the bias of Nasu and explain why Fionn should have been the best servant since Gilgamesh. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. Now, I've been wanting to do this for a minute, so we're not gonna waste any time. For all the people that are familiar with Fionn in the story, the way that he's meaned out, the sheer lack of characterization, even though he's supposed to be this and this. For all the ones that are familiar with the lore of Apocrypha, you know that in the Third Holy Grail War, Dornick was one of the final contenders, and one of the main reasons he got there was because of his servant Fionn. But have you ever sat back and questioned, why exactly is Fionn treated this way, or why would Dornick summon Fionn in the first place if everybody is out here claiming that he's so bad? And that is because in FGO he got done dirty. If I look up the strongest person in Irish myth right now, it says Cuchulainn is considered by many to be the greatest hero in Irish myth, with only one real rival for the top spot, the hunter Fionn, aka Fionn McCool. Most of our knowledge of these and other figures from Celtic folklore comes from records taken by Christian monks in the 11th and 12th centuries. If we use a thread as example, he is in the top 2 of all figures from Irish mythology. It's unclear if he or Cu is the best, but it's one of them. The same way that Cu is always glorified to be Irish hurt, Fionn is out here being regarded as Irish King Arthur or Irish Gilgamesh, and that's why I've always defended him, because as somebody that really knows what's going on, I'm looking around like, really? But if you don't do the research, you would never know that, because you're just basing it off of what fate tells you. I'm sure you've heard this argument before also. Skyhawk, one of the servants that people champion so much, received half of Fionn's kit for no reason at all. In lore, Skyhawk was supposed to be a footnote as a character, whereas Fionn, who had the actual feats, was given hardly anything to compensate. I mean, the fact that him biting his thumb, giving him literal omniscience, should have been enough to convince you that something wasn't right alone. But you know how we do it over here. I can show you better than I can tell you. So we're gonna go back into an older thread. It says, contrary to his strength in the game, Fionn is extremely powerful in the fate lore, being a descendant of Nuada, or war god, having killed the divine spirit Island, an equivalent to a god, and the magical demon Boar, the horse of the underworld, and many other monsters. This doesn't include his clairvoyance, thumb of wisdom, his healing hands, and extreme agility. His myth is older than King Arthur and Sigurd, thus it may be considered as a precursor to King Arthur and Sigurd, as it has similar themes such as the thumb biting, and the sword Nuada can be seen as a precursor to Excalibur. As you know in the Fate verse, the older something is, usually the more powerful they are. The same way that Arthur had the Knights of the Round, Fionn had the Fianna, which was also a band of warriors that only allowed the strongest and the smartest of their kind. Diarmuid, just as an example, and you saw how they had to shaft him in the story, he was also nerfed. It's not like he lost. He took his own life to progress the story. The same way that Arthur is supposed to be sleeping in a cave and come back and save Britain, Fionn is supposed to be sleeping in a cave and come back and save Ireland. The same way that Sigurd cooked the heart of Fafnir and bit his thumb to gain perception is the same way that Fionn ate the salmon of wisdom and bites his thumb to gain omniscience. But the difference is Fionn predates them both. There are many stories of the death of Fionn McCool. Like King Arthur, many traditions believe that Fionn McCool is not dead, but simply resting with the rest of the Fianna in a cave somewhere in Shebeg and Shemore Hills. The tribe and its leader will only wake up when the Dor Fionn, the hunting horn of the tribe, is blown 3 times to defend Ireland in its darkest hour. This is Arthur. The belief that King Arthur is asleep in an enchanted cave to be awakened at his country's time of need. The cave legend is found primarily in oral folklore or chronicles. Romances have Arthur living not in a cave, but on the island of Avalon. This is Sigurd. Sigurd touched the heart as it was cooking to test if it was done and burned his thumb. He put his thumb in his mouth and was able to understand the language of birds. Fionn cooked the salmon, turning it over and over, but when he touched the fish with his thumb to see if it was cooked, he burnt his finger on a drop of hot cooking fish fat. Fionn sucked his burned finger to ease the pain. Little did Fionn know that all of the salmon's wisdom had been concentrated into that one drop of fat. Fionn ate the salmon and in doing so gained all the knowledge of the world. For the rest of his life, Fionn could draw upon this knowledge merely by biting his thumb. The deep knowledge and wisdom gained from the salmon of knowledge allowed Fionn to become the leader of the Fianna, the famed heroes of Irish myth. Now, it's not uncommon for characters to predate others and share popular motifs, but if you look at the way that those characters are represented, you'll know that that happened to them. You look at Fionn, you would have no idea. He does have clairvoyance, and they do recognize his salmon feat, but it's so underwhelming that it might as well not even be there. Then you have his prominence. He is extremely famous in Ireland and relatively popular in pop culture. There are many rocks, mountains, and island formations attributed to him, such as Giant's Causeway, Fingal's Cave, and the Isle of Man. And there are many druid rituals that are attributed to him as well, such as Fionn's Wheel and Fionn's Window. When he went up against Island, it says Island was a fire-breathing goblin from the otherworld, Magmel, also known as the Burner. Island was a member of the magical tribe known as the Tuatha. And if you look into the Tuatha, they are in fact a group of god equivalents, supernaturals that would invade Ireland. He targeted his victims by playing fairy music from his harp, causing them to fall into a deep sleep. On Samhain's Eve, Fionn held his own spear to his head and inhaled its magical fumes, making him immune to the musical spell from Island's heart. He lay in wait for Island to get closer, and within reaching distance, he stabbed him with the spear, killing the goblin to everyone's joy. The Tuatha are also regarded as fairies. In the story of FGO itself, Fionn has mentioned that he has his own personal awareness with fairies, and this is part of the reason where he gets it from. When it comes to the war god, Nuada, it says Nuada, Ergetlam, meaning silver hand or arm, was the first king of the Tuatha. He is mostly known from the tale in which he loses his arm or hand in battle, and thus his kingship, but regains it after being magically healed. Nuada is thought to have been a god and is related to the British and Gaulish god Nadans. And if you remember Ergetlam, this silver arm concept, the same mythos that was used with Bedivere, the same way that Bedivere had a sword of light attached to it, that being Excalibur, that same sword of light, that also is supposed to be Fionn's, because he's the one that was a direct descendant of the sword. Arthurian lore just adopted the concept. It says Nuada is remembered for a powerful and mysterious weapon which he used. This weapon was the Sword of Light. This sword was one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha brought from the great city of Fendius. It is said that once the sword was drawn from its sheath, no one could escape it and no one could resist it. And to further support Arthur adopting part of the myth, even in Fate you have Bedivere adopting those same concepts to continue that. And that's a common thing not just in Fate but in general. People like who the series tells them to like, and they hate who the series tells them to hate. Rarely do you have the people that think for themselves and decide on their own metrics. Originally, Irish myth tells us Almu was the residence of Nuada of the Silver Hand, one of the Tuatha, but sometimes he is called the leader of these gods. He kept his great sword of Nuada at Almu. It came from the mystical city of Phineas and was one of the 4 celestial treasures the Tuatha brought to earth, alongside the cauldron, the spear, and the stone. As for the sword of Nuada, this is an expression of Excalibur, King Arthur's great sword, but there is a more occult side to it. Metaphysically, Fionn had the use of Nuada's sword, the knowledge to create and wield it, and brandished it or focused it from his citadel at Almu. His immortality, something else that doesn't get talked about. Since Fionn has iterations where he technically didn't die, he also should have an immortality buff just like the rest. Artoria was awarded with hers via Avalon, 6D conceptual defense, might as well be immortal. Heracles got his through his labors, Achilles got his through his phantasm. We get the Fionn, nothing. And going back into Skyhawk, and this is no shade, you know how she's supposed to be immortal? She was never immortal. She was so insignificant in the myth that she had no birth or death. Part of the reason that she was even there is to just big up Coop. But now she's this immortal god slayer. I wonder where she got that from. You want to know why you never really hear about her? Because originally, hardly anything exists. Fate just makes it up. Which is a cool take, but we're not finna sit here and pretend like there's not some robbery going on. A lot like Gilgamesh, Fionn was also said to be a giant. The stories of Fionn are ancient indeed, associated with the peoples who lived in Ireland before even the Celts inhabited the land, around the 3rd century BC. Sometimes a giant standing 54 feet tall. Fionn looms large in the prehistory of Ireland and the Isle of Man. If you're in tune with Gilgamesh's OG lore, he was also stated to be a giant, just to establish more connections between those two. You have Fionn's wheel, or in other words, Fionn's shield, which we never hear anything of. Fionn's shield was constructed of a hazel tree that had stood for many years upon White Hazel Mountain. This was the same tree upon which Lugh, and Lugh is the godly father of Cuchulainn, hung the severed head of Balor of the Evil Eye. And Balor is a supernatural, and he's also Cu's great-grandfather. This head contained all of Balor's wisdom as well as the power of his eye. This eye was so powerful that it was shielded with a cover of 9 layers. The cover itself required 5 men to lift it. No one could withstand the evil of Balor's stare. Balor's eye had been poisoned when he spied upon the incantations of his father's druids while in a secret ritual. His severed head dripped poisons into the fork of the hazel tree for many years, until the tree finally got split into 2 parts. So it remained until Manannán of the Round Eye determined that he would cut it down to construct the shield. The poisons of the wood killed 18 men in the felling of the tree and blinded another 9 in the making of the shield. The wood itself was covered with the hide of a sacred bull, and then it was ornamented with the symbols of druidic wisdom. The shield was eventually given to Fionn by Manannán and protected him from harm during his many battles. This shield is also supposed to ward off majority of attacks. Now check this out. Let me show you how this comes full circle. Manannán is the same spirit, the warrior king, that Bazette is being possessed by. That's the spirit that she shares as a pseudo-servant. Now remember how I told you about Froggerok and how it can one-shot people based on its activation. You want to know why Froggerok can one-shot people? Because Froggerok, that sword, is yet another weapon from Nuada. It was something that he got from Lugh. Manannán, Nuada, and Lugh were all recognized as part of the Tuatha, that supernatural group, and so they would lend armaments to each other. It says Froggerok, known as the Whisperer, the Answerer, the Retaliator, was the sword of Nuada, the first High King. The sword was forged by the gods and was meant to be wielded only by those who posed above the Stone of Destiny, which roared and the sword whispered in response. Nuada lost his arm in the first battle, and being mutilated was no longer suitable to be High King. So for the second battle, Nuada chose Lugh as provisional king. Using his spear and his sling given to him by Manannán, Lugh defeated the Fomorians and their king Balor, which I mentioned before. During the battle, Nuada gave Lugh his sword as a symbol of the king. And in tune with them lending each other these weapons, Manannán would also lend these weapons down to his descendants, or lend down the blessings. Froggerok gets passed down to Bazette from her family line. Fionn is the grandson of Manannán. Guess who else is supposed to have that sword and doesn't? You see where I'm going? Now I know most people are gonna come out and say, well, that's because he's not in his saber class. And that's fine. then give him his saber class. But this is a drop in the bucket in comparison to all the other things that's missing that has absolutely nothing to do with his class that we'll continue to get through. Manannán also had Imbar, which was supposed to be loaned down to Fionn. We can see this in his pseudo-servant form that Bazette is a part of, where he actually mixed the concept of Froggerrock with the magical horse. It says Imbar of Manannán is a horse in the Irish mythological cycle which could traverse both land and sea and was swifter than wind speed. The horse was property of the sea god Manannán, but provided to Lugh to use at his disposal. Lugh later refused to lend it to his sons, but was then forced to lend the self-navigating boat instead. And also, that self-navigating boat, Lugh also gave the blessing to Manannán for that. So Fionn is supposed to have that also. These guys have no idea. And by the way, going back to Balor of the Evil Eye, a part of the reason why this shield is so strong. If you look at Anastasia's profile, it tells us that Balor had the predecessor to the Mystic Eyes of Death. And we know the Mystic Eyes can one-shot people. And the contents of the eye, when Balor died, dripped onto the wood that was used to craft the shield. That's a part of the reason why it's so good in the first place. And we have all of these things that we already know of surrounding in the story to prove it. In her skill, Mystic Eyes of Clearsight, that comes from V. Mystic Eyes that descended from Balor in a different de-evolution line as the Mystic Eyes of Depth Perception. Again, didn't get his shield. Well, he has his spear. He doesn't need a shield. Bro, Achilles has his shield. This man Achilles has so many phantasms, he's giving them away. What the fuck? Am I lying? Didn't stop him from getting his shield. Fionn's spear, the same spear that he used to take down Island, which he does have in the story. This spear conceptually never missed, and it never gets credited for being so. It says when his widowed mother is unable to raise Fionn, she has him nursed by her sister Bodmal, a druidess. Another family member, Theoclock, also fosters the boy, endowing him with a spear that never misses its mark, which is the same spear that Fionn has now. As a matter of fact, if you think about Tristan's fail knot, the way that his bow works, the bow that never misses, it revolves around the same concept, except once again, Fionn predates Tristan. And I'm sure there's many that predate Fionn, but my point is he's not getting his credit for his turn. Again, Manannán, who is recognized as king of the otherworld, an Irish god of the sea. One of the many things that he blessed Fionn with was his sword, that being Violet Prunella. But for whatever reason, they decided to merge the sword and the spear together. If you look at Fionn's spear phantasm, the one that's supposed to never miss, it's been remodeled. It says the name originated from Fionn's sword, but it is often seen as the same as his god-slaying spear. Thus, when materialized as a phantasm, they are morphed together. Except when they're morphed together, it's not a better weapon. Imagine putting two potent things together just for the outcome to be a downgrade. Huh? And to circle back around to his kit, this is the original text. And besides his sword, Lewin, Finn had the storm shield. And when it had contact, it could be heard throughout all of Ireland. At the time of the Great Battle of Maud, Lugh, after he had struck off the head of Balor of the Evil Eye, hung it in the fork of the hazel tree, and the tree split and the leaves fell from it with the dent of the poison, and through the length of the 50 years that the tree was a dwelling place of crows and ravens, and at the end of that line Manannán was passing by, and he took notice of the tree that it was split and withered, and he bade his men to dig it up. And when they began to dig, a mist of poison rose from the roots, and 9 of the men got their death from it, and the other 9 after them, and the third 9 were blinded. And the carpenter made a shield of the wood of that hazel for Manannán. And after a while, Manannán gave it and a set of chessmen along with it to Tog. And to Tog, it came to his grandson, Finn. Looking at Fionn's original text overall, he was a king, a seer, and a poet. He was a lord with a manifold and a great train. He was our magician, our knowledgeable one, our soothsayer. All that he did was sweet with him. And however ye deem my testimony of Fionn excessive, and although ye hold my praising overstrained, nevertheless, by the king that is above me, he was 3 times better than all I say. Even the original text straight up says, you might think that I'm gassing him up, but whatever I say, he's 3 times better than that. Are you kidding me? You know how Ku beat the Hound of Hullen and took his life as a child? When Fionn took the life of Island, he was also a child. Ku beat the Hound as a child, Fionn beat a god as a child. Just putting it into perspective. Not a slight to Ku, I love Ku, but at least Ku gets his credit. As far as magecraft goes, he was raised up, taught by druids. So the same way that Ku has his runes, Fionn should also have magical accessories. He's a better mage than most. In fact, he should be a contender for the mage class. When he went up against Island tried to shoot him with flames and Fionn caught it with his cloak. The music ceased and Island hissed a fierce blue flame from his mouth, and it was as though he hissed lightning. Here it would seem that Fionn used magic. For spreading out his fringed mantle, he caught the flame. Rather, he stopped it, for it slid from the mantle and sped down into earth to the depth of the 26 spans, from which that slope is still called the Glen of the Mantle, and the rise on which Island stood is known as the Art of Fire. As a part of him being credited as a giant, his massive strength has been a part of a lot of landmarks in Ireland. Fionn carried a spear that never missed and a sword called the Wind. When he was not wielding these weapons, the legendary strength of his bare hands alone and his keen wits served him just as well. With all of the stories put together, he has probably slain serpents in every lake in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. He has been credited with carving out mountain passes, hollowing out caves, and chiseling strangely formed stones throughout the land. The uniquely formed Giant's Causeway was supposed to have been made in just a few rock tosses when Fionn decided he wanted to bridge the sea between Ireland and Scotland. He had 2 magical hounds that he also used for his protection. Fionn possessed 2 magical hounds, Bron and Salmon, who were once 2 women of the City that had been changed into a dog shape. They accompanied Fionn wherever he went. He had his magical horn. The Door of Fionn was the famous hunting horn, the Horn of Plenty, which Fionn could rally together all the men of the Fianna. And one of the biggest offenders of all, and another reason why people make the guild comparison, is his crane bag, which is yet something that he was also blessed with by his grandfather Manannán. This crane bag had so many magical items that you would lose count of them. So he should also have multiple phantasms and mystic codes. What happens to his crane bag? Your guess is as good as mine. He had the helmet of the King of Lachlan, Froggerock that could slice through any armor, a breastplate which no weapon could pierce, a coat wearing which he could not be wounded. We saw that when he was fighting against Island. He owned a cloak of mist that granted him invisibility, the bones of Assel's pig, the belt and smith hook of Gobniu, the house, the shirt, and the knife of Manannán. He had access to language, to birds, the cauldron of regeneration. He had possession of magic swine whose flesh provided food for feasting by the gods and then regenerates each day. He had a magical boat that traveled without a sail or an oar and obeyed the thoughts of those who commanded it. He had the magic goblet of truth, the shears of the King of Scotland, the great fury of Mortaltalk, which left no stroke or blow unfinished at the first trial, the little fury of Bageltalk, the Imbar of the flowing mane, which could travel over land and sea, and of course the 4 treasures of the Tuatha, the supernaturals, that include some of the things that I mentioned before, such as the Sword of Light belonging to Nuada. Now remember what I said before about Manannán lending down all of these armaments and blessings down to his descendants. What do you see? Boom, Froggerock. Boom, Imbar. That self-navigating boat from before. Come on, man. And if you're wondering why things like the boat can fit in the bag is mystical, so the blessings are a part of it. So you would have things like Imbar or other concepts that might seem intangible when you think about it. One of the few things that they did give him is his ability to heal from having the water in his hands. That actually did become a phantasm, so I will give them that. I've even seen people try to defend the way that Fionn is handled in later parts of FGO as if it were something to applaud. That's not something to applaud. That's the least that they could do. That's the bare minimum. If anybody has ever tried to diss Fionn, please send them this way. And that's why a lot of the memes, while they are funny and I get it, They're hard to stomach because once again, I know what's really going on. But even then, it's hard to laugh at times because in context, it makes no sense. A lot of people like characters for the novelty that everybody dislikes them. But I'm not like that. When it comes to the case of Fionn, he truly got snubbed. Now I'm hoping that his position in Apocrypha is starting to make more sense.